Hey guys, welcome to Telling the Told and Untold. My name is Tshego. There aren't any content warnings for this case, so let's just go straight into it. Martiza van der Merwe came from a very close-knit family in Westbank, Malmesbury. Her parents, Elizabeth and Clifford van der Merwe, had raised 3 children in a comfortable, simple home with good values and through hard work. In 1997, Martiza was 21 years old and she was the oldest of 3. She had 2 younger brothers. Martiza had always wanted to be a model. She was described as someone who was very strikingly beautiful and she really had hopes of doing that in the future. But in the present moment, so 1997, she just wanted more of some stability. So she just decided to get a normal 9-to-5 job. So she became an admin clerk at New Late Chicken Farm in Wellington. Martiza and Shawn had known each other for most of their lives and they had a really good friendship, but eventually this friendship turned into something more and the 2 of them started dating. In 1997, Shawn was 19 years old and the Lategan and van der Merwe family knew each other, and Shawn's family didn't mind him dating Martiza. They thought that she was a very good girl and they didn't mind their age gap, even though it was just 2 years, because again, Martiza was 21 years old and Shawn was 19. Just like Martiza, Shawn had lived in Westbank for all of his life, and once he was done with school, Shawn started working for his father's building company and he had managed to save up enough money to buy himself his very first car, which was a Ford Laser Sport. And Shawn loved his car and he just loved cars in general. He loved his car so much so that he even saved up more money so that he could get the car its own sound system, and he and Martiza would spend most of their time in Shawn's car, just driving around, listening to music and enjoying each other's company. The Lategan family had 4 children and Shawn was the 3rd born. He had 2 older sisters and a younger sister, and every single morning he would wake up, eat breakfast and take his younger sister Lauren to school. Shawn was also described as someone who is very precise. He saw everything as black and white, either something was wrong or something was right, and Martiza was like the complete opposite. She was very talkative, she was bubbly, and it was like these 2 opposites that just came together, like how they say opposites attract. And because Shawn was always so precise and everything was either right or wrong, black or white, he would always make sure that he got home at 10 p.m. by the latest, and if he was going to stay out later that night, he would always call his parents just to let them know where he was and what time he would be back home. But on Tuesday, the 23rd of April 1997, that wasn't the case. On that Tuesday, Martiza had called her mom and asked her mom to please make her dinner, her favorite meal that her mom would ever make her, which was chicken curry. And then later that night, Martiza got home. But once she got home, she was in a rush and her mom was also in a rush. Her mom was in a rush because she was going to a church event, and Martiza was in a rush because Shawn was coming to pick her up and they were going to spend some time together. Martiza's mom would rush out of the door to try and make it on time for her church function, and this would be the last time that she would ever see Martiza alive again. That night, Martiza's mom got back home and she was surprised to see that Martiza wasn't home. It was very unusual for her not to be back at that time, and she also thought it was a bit strange because she knew that Martiza had work the next day. So she was just a bit anxious and she just was wondering where Martiza was, and her husband just told her just to calm down and relax, and was just like, you know what, she's out with her boyfriend, they probably just lost track of time, but they'll be home soon. But Martiza's mom just couldn't shake this feeling that she had, call it maternal instinct, but you know, she just knew that something was wrong. At midnight, she then decided to call one of Martiza's friends who lived nearby, and this friend told her that she had seen Martiza and Shawn earlier that evening, but she didn't know where they were at that moment. And Martiza's mom thanked her and apologized for waking her up, and then she just sat on the couch and waited, and just waited for Martiza to come home. The sun then rose and Martiza still hadn't got back home. At that time when the sun was rising, the Lategan family was up and getting ready for their day. Shawn's mom and little sister Lauren were downstairs. They were eating breakfast, and then Shawn's mother told Lauren to go check on her brother because he would always take Lauren to school every single morning. So she then went to her brother's room. She opened the door and the bed was unmade, and it was clear that Shawn hadn't come back the night before. It was at this moment when the Van der Merwe and Lategan families both came to the horrifying realization that both their children hadn't come home the night before, and they hadn't heard from them since. This is when they decided to start searching, and they searched everywhere that they could possibly think of, but they came out empty-handed. And this is when they decided to go to the police and report the two missing. The next day, Martiza's mom decided to call Denzel, who is Martiza's uncle, and just let him know that his niece was missing. And she was also hoping that maybe he would be able to help because he was a police officer. He then told Martiza's mom that he would keep an eye out for Shawn's white Ford Laser, and he also told all the police officers that were on duty that day to just keep an eye out for the car, but no one saw anything. 40 hours after Martiza and Shawn were last seen, a man who was driving on Baines-Kloof Pass reported having seen a car at the bottom of a steep ridge. And at 4 p.m, police and rescue workers descended hundreds of meters down a steep rock face to reach the car. Once they got to the car, they found no one inside, and they then started searching the surrounding areas, trying to find the passengers who had been in the car. This is when they stumbled upon a horrifying scene, and this is what turned an accident investigation into a double homicide. The police then discovered the bodies of a man and woman lying relatively close to one another. They both had plastics over their heads, and their hands were tied behind their backs with adhesive tape. At this point, they couldn't identify the two bodies, and you can call it like the stars aligning or everything just coming together to try and get the right people to identify these bodies, because Uncle Denzel was at a nearby police station, not the one that he worked in, but the one near Baines-Kloof, and he heard a couple of police officers talking about how a white car had been found in the Baines-Kloof ravine, and there were two bodies, and immediately he made his way to Baines-Kloof. Once he got there, he told the police officers about his niece and her boyfriend having been missing and the white car, and the police officers asked him if he could try and identify the bodies. Denzel did not know Shawn, but he said that he could try and identify the woman's body. And once the bodies got up, he couldn't see the woman's face because of the plastic that was over her face, but he then asked if he could look at her fingers, and this is because Martiza had a bad habit of biting her fingernails to like the end. So he looked at this woman's fingernails, and immediately he knew that it was his niece. Police officers had just found the bodies of Martiza van der Merwe and Shawn Lategan. On the Sunday after the murders, Martiza and Shawn were laid to rest side by side in Merwe Cemetery, and a 25,000 Rand reward was offered for information leading to the arrest of the couple's killers. Police had no doubt that there had been more than one person involved in the brutal murders of this couple, and they started their investigation, and this is when rumors started that there was a love triangle between the couples and maybe like someone else, an ex, someone new. Police officers looked into this, but they found no evidence to support this claim. A couple of weeks later, someone in the town of Ceres called police and told them to search a man named Ruben Hector's car because there was just something that wasn't right. When police officers searched Ruben's car, they found several items that kind of just made them suspicious, including Shawn Lategan's leather jacket. They also discovered that the car had recently been repainted black, and it just wasn't making sense. Initially, Ruben refused to say anything, but after some interrogation, he finally revealed the names of 2 people. One of the names was someone that Ceres police knew too well. It was Andrew April, and Andrew April was one of them. He was just on suspension. The other name that Ruben gave police officers was Percy Whittles, but Percy Whittles was nowhere to be found, and neither was his car. Percy Whittles drove a Ford Cortina, and it came out that he had recently repainted the car black. As police officers were looking into Percy Whittles and trying to find him, they discovered that Percy Whittles wasn't his real name. His real name was Peter Heinrich. Word spread that police officers were looking for Percy Whittles or Peter Heinrich, and this is when someone decided to call police and let them know that Percy Whittles was on his way home from Worcester to Ceres, and he wasn't alone. When police officers were looking for Percy Whittles, it turned out that he was on the run with 2 other men, a Donovan Kretcher and a Ricardo Forti, and those 3 men alongside another man had decided to rob a local coffee shop. They had walked in, held the owner at gunpoint, and managed to get 900 rands. They were then making their way home when police officers had set up a roadblock and arrested all 3 men in connection with the murders of Shawn Lategan and Martiza van der Merwe. With all 5 men in custody, the pieces fell into place. All 5 men were friends and lived in areas surrounding Malmesbury. Only one of the men, 23-year-old Donovan Kretcher, did not live in the surrounding area. He lived in Yesterveer in Cape Town, and he had left Cape Town the year before to live with a friend because he was on the run from police. He was involved in a robbery alongside Ricardo Forti, and he had also been involved in a fuel theft the prior December. Then, only 2 weeks after Percy's arrest, he managed to escape prison with 4 other inmates, all who had been arrested for armed robbery. Somehow, they managed to escape Warmbokveld prison in Ceres, and then Percy was on the run for 3 weeks before he was eventually re-arrested. While Percy was on the run, Ricardo Forti then decided to turn state witness, and this is because he knew that he was going to be convicted for the murders of Shawn and Martiza, as well as the robbery at the local coffee shop, but also the attempted murder of another man, and we'll get into that just now. With Ricardo turning state witness, we finally found out what happened on Tuesday the 23rd of April 1997. Shortly after Marita's mom had rushed out of the door to go to a church function, Shawn had picked up Marita and they drove around a bit before eventually settling in to listen to music on a street next to Malmesbury Post Office. And this was a place where young people often gathered in the evening just to socialize. Just after 9 p.m, Shawn and Marita were about to head home, but they felt a bit hungry, so they then decided to go get some food at a local fish and chip shop that opened later than other shops. So they then got there at around 9:20 and they pulled into the parking lot. And across the road, directly outside the fish and chip shop, was a cream-colored Ford Cortina with black bumpers, silver alloy wheels, and tinted windows. And there were 5 men in the car that night: Donovan Kretcher, Ricardo Forti, Percy Whittles, Andrew April, and Ruben Hector. There were two men that were standing outside of the car, and they saw this car pull in, and immediately they were just so annoyed. There was also a woman that happened to walk past at this very moment, and she remembered looking at these two men and just seeing how annoyed they were. The two men then decided to walk across the road to Shawn's car. The five men had a plan that night. They were going to rob the fish and chip shop. They were going to get there late in the night, just before it was about to close. They were going to walk in with Andrew's service gun, because remember, he is a suspended police officer, as well as a shotgun that another man had. They were then going to hold the owner at gunpoint and just open the tills and take as much money as they can, as well as any other valuables. And as they were preparing to go into the fish and chip shop, Donovan and Ricardo were outside of the car just surveying the street, trying to pick the perfect time when Shawn's Ford Laser pulled into the parking space across the road. And because the fish and chip shop was the only shop that was open at that time, they immediately knew that this couple was planning to go into that shop, and they were just annoyed because, you know, they were ready to go into the shop, and now this car came in and just paused their robbery. Donovan and Ricardo then decided to go across to Shawn's car, and then Donovan opened the door, got inside, and overpowered Shawn, while Ricardo kept Martiza from getting outside of the car. Donovan then instructed Shawn to drive, and Ricardo opened the window and kind of flicked his hand to show the other three men that they should drive their car and follow them. And this is when they had decided to kind of change their plan. They planned to hijack Martiza and Shawn. They were then going to drop them off on a random side of the road and then use their car for another robbery that they had planned, because that night not only did they plan to rob the fish and chip shop, but they were going to also rob a local coffee shop that also stayed open until late. And they just kind of had the same plan of going in with their guns, holding the owner at gunpoint and opening the tills and taking as much money and valuables as they could. The two cars then drove around Malmesbury looking for a deserted area, but eventually they just pulled over on the side of the road, and the men took Shawn and Martiza out of the car. Shawn begged the men to let them go, but somewhere during this whole ordeal, the five men decided to change their plan. The couple's hands were then forced behind their backs and tied with adhesive tape, and then they opened the boot of Shawn's car and forced the couple inside. They then drove the two cars again, just trying to figure out what they were going to do, and eventually they came to a stop again. They opened the boot and they forced the two couples out of the car, and Percy pulled a gun on them. As soon as Percy pulled out the gun, Shawn tried to make a break for it, and he started running, and the five men just looked at him and they started laughing because they knew that he wouldn't be able to get far. His hands were tied behind his back. It was dark. There was only one of him and five of them. They then chased him down, kicked his feet until he fell to the floor, and then they dragged him back to the cars. The group then discussed what they were going to do with the couple, and Andrew told them that he didn't think it was a good idea for them to kill them, and he just suggested that they just leave them exactly where they were and just continue with their plan, like the plans that they had for that night. But this is when Donovan kind of just lost it, and he told Andrew that that was not going to happen because both Shawn and Martiza had seen his face and he was not going to let them live to tell their tale. He then said that if Andrew didn't want to kill them, then he would take the gun and shoot him in the head right there and then he could join them in death. When Ricardo heard Donovan's threat about shooting Andrew in the head, he then decided to start beating Shawn in the face as well as in the chest. The couple was then placed in the boot again, but this time in Percy's car, and then the two cars drove around in series, just trying to look for a place. They eventually settled at a picnic spot and forced the couple out of the car again and began beating Shawn again. And once they were tired of using their hands, they then took a tree trunk and started hitting Shawn in the head. They then took his hands that were still tied, like still bound behind his back, and they pulled his hands up, trying to strangle him somehow. And when that didn't work, they then decided to take a plastic bag, put it over Shawn's head, take adhesive tape and tie it around the plastic so that he would basically suffocate. Martiza saw all of this, and after they were done with Shawn, they then went to Martiza and did the same thing. Put a plastic bag over her head and tied it around with adhesive tape. They then forced the couple into the boot of Shawn's car, and they drove around a bit until they got to Baines Kloof, and they then got out of the car and all 5 men pushed Shawn's car over Baines Kloof into the ravine. They didn't stay to see what happened to the car. If they had stayed, they would have seen that the car hit so many different rocks, and then the boot opened and Martiza and Shawn's bodies flung out, hit different rocks, and finally landed in the valley, all bloodied and broken. Martiza and Shawn's cause of death was suffocation, but whether or not they were still alive when the boot flung open, we will never know. After the 5 men had carried out this horrendous act, they then decided to lay low and return to their various homes across Burland. And that Friday they read about the wreckage of the car and the bodies of the couple that had been found. The killers were still following the progress of the investigation in newspapers, and they were relieved when they found out that police officers were still looking in the Malmesbury areas and hadn't extended their search. And because of this, they kind of gained a bit of confidence. They repainted the car black, they got new number plates, and they were just confident that they weren't going to get caught. And this is when they decided to plan another robbery. This time they were going to go to a pub in Malmesbury again, and this is a pub that Andrew wanted them to go to because he had been going there for a couple of years and he felt as though he had spent so much money there and he wanted to get his money back. So the plan was that they were going to go to this pub. Andrew was going to go inside with someone else and they were going to drink and just act like they were just visiting for the night, just drinking, playing snooker, having fun, and then the other 3 men would join them. The 5 men did exactly that. They got to the pub and Percy Whittles wore Shawn's leather jacket. Andrew and his brother-in-law were inside first, and then the other 3 men joined them. And once the club had cleared out, they then put their plan into action. The men then called the manager of the pub, Vihan Luba, and asked him to help them get the white ball out of the pocket. And as Vihan bent over to try and get the ball, Donovan then held a gun to the man's head. Vihan's first reaction was to try and get the gun, and this is when he and Donovan started struggling, and then Andrew pulled out a pocket knife and held it to Vihan's neck. They also managed to tie his hands behind his back. Then once they did this, they went to empty the tills, and once they were done, Ricardo looked over at Donovan, and Donovan kind of put his thumb across his throat, indicating to Ricardo that he should kill Vihan, and then Ricardo stabbed Vihan in the throat 9 times. The men then gathered all of the stuff that they had found. They had managed to get 26,000 rand from the tills. They got Vihan's cell phone, they got his car keys, and as they were just kind of like gathering together, they were also speaking about the Baines Kloof murders and how the couple had been found. What they didn't know though is that Vihan was still alive after he had been stabbed 9 times in the neck, and he heard everything they had to say. Vihan would survive the attack and he was in hospital for a couple of weeks, but he did survive. It came out during the trial that when Shawn realized that there was no way out, he pleaded with the 5 men to just kill him and let Martiza go. But Martiza said in a very soft voice that if they were going to kill Shawn, they should kill her too because she couldn't live without him. Because Ricardo Forti turned state witness, he was given 40 years for the murders of Shawn Lategan and Martiza van der Merwe. The other 4 men were all found guilty and given life sentences. After Shawn's murder, his mother was hospitalized for depression, and everyone who knew and loved the couple really struggled to deal with their untimely deaths. And then about 22 years after their murders, in February 2019, Shawn's sisters met with the 5 men, and the meeting was arranged by the Department of Corrections as part of the restorative justice process. And during the meeting, Shawn's sisters heard what happened to Shawn and Martiza was even more shocking than what they had heard during the trial. The 5 men told them that they each took turns punching Shawn on his chest by his heart in an attempt to stop his heart, and when that didn't work, they took a tree trunk and bashed his head with it, and still he just wouldn't die. The men then admitted that as slight in stature as Shawn was, he was extremely strong and continuously fought for his life. At some point, Andrew April was up for parole, and one of the members of the parole committee asked Andrew what he would have done if someone had killed his child, and he told them that he would kill the perpetrators. And upon hearing this, the member of the parole committee then decided that they should add 2 more years to his sentence. But eventually Andrew April was released on parole and he's somewhere out there today. Ricardo Forti was also up for parole, but he has been denied several times. And then Donovan Krecha decided to be a spokesperson for a lot of people in a prison, and he mostly represents members of the 27th gang. I'm not too sure where the other 2 men ended up, but hopefully they're still in prison serving their sentence, unlike Andrew April. And that's it for today's case. Thank you guys so much for watching. Please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. It helps out my channel a lot. And I'll see you guys next time. Bye!